Hey there, it's Jacques from Heroes and Legends, and hopefully this is the last Ixalan Leak video that I'll have to do, or at least for quite some time. If you haven't heard, yesterday a uncut sheet of foil rares from Ixalan was leaked out. Somebody took photos of it, and early yesterday we got our first photos. Last night more photos came in of the sheet. It's the same sheet, just with different pictures. So as time went on, we've been able to see more of the cards. So now that the sheet is pretty well out there, I think, I wanted to do a recap and just go over what cards that we can decipher at this point. A lot of them you still can't read, and for any card I didn't have enough detail to actually talk coherently about, I didn't include here. There are some things that were seen, like it looks like a Planeswalker that maybe was a Jace, a vehicle that looked interesting, but you won't see those here because we couldn't really interpret enough of the cards to figure out what they do. So this is a complete recap of the things that, at least for the most part, we could read. Now, before I get started, I do want to say this. I mentioned this in yesterday's videos. I really hope this is the last of these leaks and that Wizards can get a hold of this. I hate reporting on these just simply because I do think it takes away from the fun of the reveals, and I think it does hurt the sales of the set in the long run, and that's not where we want to be as players at all. It's not where Hasbro or Wizards wants to be either, of course. But the reason I even bother to do it is because the information's out there. I mean, it's everywhere, really, at this point. Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, all over the place. And I feel like I do owe it to my viewers to report on it because these cards are going to impact the market. So if you're in the market for singles, especially anything that plays well with tribal, merfolk, for example, there is going to be an uptick in value and pricing of these cards. I don't think it's fair for anyone to get suckered into a bad trade or something like that just because we didn't talk about these particular leaks. So here we are. We're talking about them. I don't like it, but we're going to do it. And anyway, let's get into them. And there's a lot to talk about, so I don't want to waste time. And I'm going to go through relatively fast because there's a lot of them. All right, let's get going. First off, here is one of the more recent photos from last night of the full sheet. Again, pause the video, look over it. You can also probably find this online basically everywhere at this point. So there are going to be things, like I said, I couldn't read, but definitely see if there's some other stuff you can pick out. Here's another photo. It's a little clearer of a corner of the sheet. There's a close-up that's been going around too since yesterday evening. Now, fortunately, Mythic Spoiler did a pretty good job at lifting a lot of these images, so shout out to them, and that's what you're going to see on some of these cards. All right, we're going to start off with Ashes of the Abhorrent. We actually talked about this one yesterday, so I'll go fast. A 1/1 enchantment. Players can't cast spells from graveyards or activate abilities of cards in graveyards. Whenever a creature dies, you gain 1 life. So basically, I still feel the same way about this. Really cheap way to shut down graveyard tactics. It's going to be a card that sees play in a lot of formats. Perhaps Vintage, definitely I think Legacy and Modern. If you're looking for some graveyard hate and you're in white and it's cheap, I mean, it's only 2 mana to cast this. It's actually really good, I think. It's another card that's going to hurt Dredge for sure. So sorry to the Dredge players out there, but this is definitely going to see play. Bishop of Rebirth. 2 white and 3. It's a vampire cleric with vigilance 3/4. When this attacks, you may return target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now, I always like these type of cards that allow you to take things from your graveyard and put them right into the battlefield. I think those are phenomenal effects. This one costs 5, but you get a 3/4 body. It has vigilance, which is nice. So if you're on the defensive, having vigilance at least makes your opponent have to keep up a blocker if they don't want you digging into your graveyard for stuff. Mana cost 3 or less, I think is acceptable for a card that costs 5. Like 2 or less maybe would have felt a little low, but 3 or less, I feel like that's the meat of your deck. There should be enough targets out there for you. So I actually like this card. The biggest issue is, again, now we don't know the standard format at this point or what it's going to look like, so I don't want to get too crazy into speculating on what's standard playable and what's not, because really that's just a shot in the dark at this point. But I will say that 2 white and 3 traditionally has some powerful cards, and we've even seen some powerful cards recently that will still be in standard with this, so it's going to be hard maybe for this to cross over into a lot of decks, but maybe in a white weenie deck, if there's one popular out there and successful enough out there, this could be the top end of a curve for a deck like that. Goring Ceratops. 2 white and 5. It's a dinosaur. Now, we don't know the power and toughness, unfortunately, so it's hard to evaluate this card. But it does have double strike, and when it attacks, other creatures you control gain double strike until end of turn. So it's a little too pricey, I think, for like competitive Magic, but maybe a commander card. I mean, it does give everything potentially double strike. That could be a huge, huge swing if you time it right. And because of that, this isn't a card you want to overlook. Kamala's Sunwing. This costs a white and 2. It's a dinosaur. It has flying. It's a 2/3. Creatures your opponent control enter the battlefield tapped. For 3 mana, this feels really economical to me. A 2/3 flyer, and also it slows down your opponent's stuff. Like, yeah, I'd be happy to run this. And I think it's important to note tribal is a big element in this set. We've seen that just from the cards we've seen leaked anyway, so far. And having the dinosaur archetype definitely will mean something, and I'm sure will play along with a lot of the cards that we're going to see in the future. Minya Frian, Dark Apostle, a white and 2 legendary creature, Vampire Cleric again. I think it's funny we found these white zombies in Amonkhet, now we get the white vampires in this set, so they're doing something different. I do appreciate that. It's a 2/2. Whenever one or more non-token vampires you control attack, create a 1/1 white vampire creature token with lifelink. So it is a way to hopefully expand your board. If you can attack in with some vampires, your armies are going to grow. You also get lifelink on the token. So it's interesting to me. But the fact that it's a 2/2 for 3 and its ability really is dependent on the board state, whether you're able to have other creatures and if you're able to attack in, doesn't make me super high on this card, quite honestly. On top of that, it's legendary, which is going to be a drawback for this card. So I don't know. This is an interesting, probably fun tribal card to play around with. Other than that, I don't know if I'm too high on it. Priest of the Wandering Sun. This costs 1 white. It's a human cleric. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may reveal a dinosaur card from your hand. If you do, you gain 2 life. And then you can pay 2 white and 3. Sacrifice this. Search your library for a dinosaur card. Reveal it. Put it in your hand. Shuffle. It's a 1/1. So, basically, a dinosaur tutor. So, if you need to find your dinosaurs, this is probably very playable. We just don't know yet what dinosaurs are going to be worth searching for. We see some good ones here. There's definitely at least one in green that's got me really interested. But the dinosaurs that are around this card could make or break it as far as where you're going to see this played, right? So it's a little too early to call that. But it's interesting. It could be a fun commander card if you are looking for another way to dig out your best dinosaurs. Sanguine Sacrament. And this costs 2 white and X. It's an instant. You gain twice X life. Put this on the bottom of its owner's library. Now, I'm not usually real high on life gain cards because I don't feel like they advance your board state or anything like that. They buy you time, and they are good in certain circumstances. I pay a little more attention when the life gain starts to become greater. Like you start thinking about maybe 5, 10, 15 life. I start to sit up and notice a little bit. This feels like it has the potential to gain a lot of life for you. Like this is kind of like Stream of Life on steroids. And it's at instant speed. That goes a long way in a control deck where you could be holding back counter magic or something, and if you don't need to use it, then you just simply heal yourself. So I don't hate this card. It's not going to be for every situation, though. I feel like this is something I might want to sideboard in against a hyper-aggressive deck so that maybe in the middle of the game I can recover a little bit, but it's not a card that I'm going to just probably flatly play. Scuttle the Wreckage. 2 white and 2, it's an instant. Exile all attacking creatures target player controls. That player may search his or her library for that many basic land cards, put those cards onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle his or her library. So it's kind of like a crazy Path to Exile. Now, not as good as Path, of course, because first off, the creatures have to be attacking. It costs 4. Path only costs 1. That's a really big difference. But it does target multiple cards. And the Exile is nice because it gets around things like, for example, Indestructible or something like that. So I do like the card, and it's instant. That goes a long way for me. I'm very happy about that, as of course it would have to be considering it's getting attacking creatures. But I like it. I don't know if it's going to be better than other removal, but again, it's a little too early to call. Tokov's Honor Guard. This one's a white and 1, human soldier. Unfortunately, you can't really make out the power and toughness. Toughness is definitely cut off. Maybe it's like a 2/2 hate bear. Creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. So I find that interesting. Sideboard card for a lot of situations, maybe even in Modern or Legacy if you're up against a deck that is relying on those type of triggers. It's definitely playable. Really cheap card. Arcane Adaptation. Now we talked about this one yesterday, but I want to go over it again because it is a really interesting card. Blue and 2 enchantment. Enters the battlefield. Choose a creature type. Creatures you control are the chosen type in addition to their other types. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So very similar to a card that already exists, Conspiracy, which costs 2 black and 3, so a lot more expensive. And also, Conspiracy just kind of turns all your stuff into the creature type, where this is the creature type in addition to whatever it was before. In most cases, I think that will be a positive for you. And because you're messing around with something that's this sweeping, there's a lot of crazy combos you can do. First off, it helps make things into tribal decks that maybe normally wouldn't be tribal decks. That's interesting on its own. Secondly, you can think of probably a lot of different combos you can do with this. Some may be janky, some maybe are decent, and I think someone might come up with something good with this. It's cheap enough to play around with, so why not? But I find this one really interesting. Daring Saboteur. Now, this one, unfortunately, we can't see the power toughness. It got cut off, but it appears that the casting cost is a blue and 1, human pirate. Pay a blue and 2. It can't be blocked this turn, and if it deals combat damage to a player, you get to loot. Now, power toughness makes or breaks this card. I mean, if it's a 0-1, this card's going to feel a lot worse, right? But if it's just decent, even if it's just like a 1-1, I feel like there's some value to be had here. I mean, I like to loot. I like to make things unblockable. I like to do both. So this feels like it could be a good card. I mean, I'll hold the final evaluation until we find out power and toughness. Dreamcaller Siren. 2 blue and 3. This is a Siren pirate with flash. Now, it has flying, but it can only block creatures with flying. It's a 3/3. This enters the battlefield if you control another pirate. Tap up to 2 target non-land permanents. This is another one we saw yesterday. I wasn't sure if it was pirate, but we got a better picture of it. So it is a tap if you control another pirate. Now, it's not a freeze effect like the cards do on tap on the next untap step. But still, I feel like there's a fair amount of value here. I mean, flash... 5 casting cost 3/3 flyer, even though it can't block ground creatures. I think it's pretty decent. Again, I don't know if this is seeing any sort of constructed standard play or anything like that, but it feels like a really good limited card to me, if nothing else. Evaporating Melody. So maybe there's a cycle of these. 2 blue and X, instant, gain control of target creature with converted mana cost X. So steal a creature card that is not an enchantment. It's a permanent lasting effect. I do like that. And it's at instant speed, so you can do this in the middle of combat, really kind of mess up the combat math. This card's really cool to me. Now, you do have to have the mana to make it work for you, but control decks, I don't know, maybe this is something a control deck might want to run. I do find it interesting. Again, it's a little dependent on the board state and what's going on. Maybe it's more of a sideboard card, I'm not sure yet. But at least, for starters, this is a card that I'm very intrigued by. Herald of Seven Servants. A blue and 2, Merfolk Warrior 2/3. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them can't be blocked. Okay, if you haven't noticed yet, this is a very aggressive format, and we're going to see some other mechanics as we go forward that really pay you off for being aggressive. And this card is just one of those cards that does that. I mean, it creates situations where maybe multiple of your creatures are unblockable. That could be a finisher. I mean, this could actually be really decent. This will be phenomenal in +1/+1 counter commander decks. If those decks are playing blue, and most of them are, then you're going to be happy to run a copy of this in there. This is actually pretty nuts. So yeah, I think this card's going to be really good in some formats. Again, we don't know enough about standard to see if there's enough ways to get counters on stuff that are reliable and so on and so forth at this juncture anyway. But it's still a very good card with raw power. Koppenol, Warden of Waves. 2 blue and 1. It's a legendary creature Merfolk Wizard 2/2. Spells your opponents cast that target a Merfolk you control cost 1 more to cast. Abilities your opponents activate that target a Merfolk you control cost 1 more to activate. I don't know, I'm not super high on this one. It costs 3 for 2/2. It's legendary, which again can be a drawback. It feels like if I have a Merfolk commander deck, maybe I toss this in because why not? But I don't think it's even going to be that great there, quite honestly. My biggest issue with this is you have a little bit of a distraction, I guess, to your opponents that are trying to get rid of your merfolk, but it doesn't really do enough. Like, I feel like you're not going to put this in a legacy merfolk deck because there's just better stuff. So yeah, I'm not super high on this one. It's fine, but if you're looking for an interesting merfolk, it's there, I guess. River's Rebuke. 2 blue and 4 sorcery. Return all non-land permanents target player controls to their owner's hand. Okay, this feels big to me. Like, this is a one-sided upheaval. Granted, it doesn't hit lands, but it's going to hit everything else the target opponent has. And that might be a little awkward in Commander. Obviously, it might not get you there, but if this is a card you use once it's down to you and the other player, that could be really good for you. But just overall, it costs 6. I mean, that's reasonable, I think, for this effect. And making them pick up their whole board state and have to replay it at the worst case scenario, it's a big tempo play. Best case scenario, you win the game. Like, this is a decent card. Again, maybe something for a control deck to really tempo the opponent out. I don't know. Alright, this card we couldn't really make out the name. It looks like maybe something Prophecy. This does appear to be a mythic, though. It's 2 black and 5. It's a sorcery. Exile up to 5 target creature cards from graveyards. An opponent separates those cards into piles. Put all cards from the pile of your choice onto the battlefield under your control and the other into their owner's graveyard. Okay, so I say this all the time. I think I said it yesterday in one of the videos. I'm not a big fan of cards that allow my opponent to make decisions. But there are exceptions to that. It just depends on the type of decisions they're making and if I feel like I can paint them into a corner. Fact or Fiction is a good example of that, right? Your opponent is involved in the decision making, but it's kind of a lose-lose situation for your opponent. And Fact or Fiction is an amazing card. This is not Fact or Fiction. I mean, this cost a lot more than that, right? This is 7. But I do find it intriguing, especially if you can stack the deck a little bit by playing a lot of really strong cards that are being dumped into your graveyard. It at some point is going to force your opponent to be into a no-win situation, right? And the card could be good in certain builds. Again, I'm thinking more Commander, mostly because of the casting cost here, and the card is tied into graveyards and what's come before it in the game, so it's not always going to be reliable for like competitive standard or anything like that, I don't think. But I think this is a fine Commander card again, and a really good card, perhaps even in some limited builds. Just depends on what else is out there in the environment. Bloodstained Paladin, a black and 3 Vampire Knight. It has Flash. It's a 3/4. When this enters the battlefield, it will come in with a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature that died this turn. I actually like the economy behind this card. I mean, a 3/4 for 4 with Flash. Now, granted, sure, it doesn't have evasion or anything, but I still think for 4 mana, that's pretty good. And then it has this quasi-morbid effect where anything that died this turn is going to buff it with +1/+1 counters. And the Flash really lets you exploit that. Like, even if you're in a multiplayer game like Commander, and you're not even involved in the combat, you just flash this in and you just reap the benefits of it. Like, I think that's kind of fun. And if it is a 1v1 game, then yeah, there's plenty of opportunities in a 1v1 game to maybe get aggressive, let some of your creatures die, hopefully something from your opponent's side dies, and then you're able to just throw this out and have a big creature. I actually really like this card. Again, it's a little situational on what's going on, so I don't know if it gets there in like standard or anything like that. But I feel like there's a lot of good plays you could find in a limited game with a card like this. And again, multiplayer games, I feel like this could be really good. Deadeye Tracker. Costs 1 black. It's a human pirate, 1/1. Pay a black and 1 and tap. Exile 2 target cards from an opponent's graveyard. And this will then explore. So explore is a new keyword. Reveal the top card of your library. Put that card into your hand if it's a land. Otherwise, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Then put the card back on top of your library or into your graveyard. So this is pretty interesting. It's a little 1/1 for 1, sure. But let's talk about that explorer mechanic first. I really like this. Like, first off, you have to trigger it, but whatever triggers it on the particular card then lets you look at that top card of your library. You do have to reveal it. But if it's a land, great, it's card draw. And if it's not, you kind of do this weird sort of scry where you either leave it on top or you throw it in your graveyard. So again, it kind of helps populate the graveyard too. And that's another thing I've noticed here. Graveyard mechanics, we saw a lot of them in Amonkhet, right? I'm sure we'll see more in Hour of Devastation. So a lot of times the new set comes out, they give you a lot of like heat to kind of block out the last set. So you'd expect to see some graveyard hate here, and this card is some graveyard hate. But at the same time, it also feels like this set's also trying to play around with the graveyard a little bit. So maybe these two blocks are going to work pretty well in tandem with each other. I guess we'll have to wait and see. This card itself, it's a cheap way. Maybe you just side this in a limited game to deal with some sort of graveyard shenanigans. Perhaps if graveyard shenanigans are strong enough in the standard world, this card becomes a lot better and is even playable there. I mean, it is real cheap, if nothing else. And that Explore mechanic's interesting, though. That's the big takeaway, for me anyway, from this card. Fathom Fleet Captain, a black and 1 human pirate with menace. It's a 2-1. I think it's a 2-1. It might be a 2-3 or 1-1, but probably a 2-1. Menace, whenever Fathom Fleet Captain attacks, if you control another attacking pirate, you may pay 2. If you do, create a 2/2 black pirate creature token with lifelink. I don't know. I like that it has menace. It's cheap. It's real fragile, though. If that really is a 1 toughness, that bothers me a little bit. So this card feels a little dependent on board state and what's going on in the game for it to be really good. And again, it looks fragile, so I don't feel like this is a standard card. But perhaps in a good tribal draft, this could do a little work for you. And again, if there is a way to pull together a pirate commander deck, this definitely could be part of it. And we're going to see some good pirates coming up too. One especially that feels like it would be a great commander. Ogre Hand Ravenger. 2 black and 3. This is an orc pirate wizard, of course. Menace and Death Touch. It's a 4/4. When this enters the battlefield, each player loses a third of his or her life rounded up. Wow, okay. Now, first off, take away that other ability. I like getting a 4/4 with Menace and Death Touch for 5 mana. Like, I feel like that's really good. Now, everyone's losing a third of their life. That includes you. So that's where this gets awkward. If you are in a situation where you can't afford to lose life and you draw this card, you're already losing. Is it enough to allow you to come back? In a lot of cases, maybe not, right? So that's a little awkward about this card. But I'm thinking about, again, maybe multiplayer games, maybe Commander, and you have a situation where you're able to do a lot of damage to everybody at the table at the same time, and you have a way to defend yourself, maybe like a Pillow Fort style deck or something like that. This card could be interesting in some builds. Definitely a tool that you can kind of take out of your toolbox. I also find this interesting maybe in some aggro decks, because again, a Rakdos aggro deck, if you have a lot of burn behind it or something like that, and you can do a chunk of damage and put out a 4/4 Menace Death Toucher on turn 5 as the top of your curve or something like that, that actually could be good. So I don't know, maybe in that case it could see a little bit of standard play, but I do think the high variance of this card might keep it out of the competitive formats. Revel in Riches. At least that's what we think it is. That is what a lot of the folks on the message boards have kind of interpreted, but I'll be honest, I'm not 100% looking at the picture there. A black and 1, and again, that is a little shaky too. Enchantment. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control, we think maybe 6 or more treasures, you win the game. So it is an alternate win condition card. It appears to be a pretty cheap card, though. And you know what? If nothing else, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you get a treasure on your side of the battlefield that can turn into color fixing or ramp. For 2 mana, I'm interested. I don't know if it's good or not, but I'm interested. Some decks will probably like to have something like this. I like the treasure mechanic too, and we talked a little bit about it yesterday, but I find it pretty intriguing because we've seen stuff like this before. I mean, this isn't completely new or anything, but I like these type of mechanics, so I'm kind of happy to see it. As far as how easy or hard it is to get 6, if that is truly the number, of these things and untap with them, I don't know. It probably isn't that easy. Rune Raider. Unfortunately, again, we don't see the power and toughness here. It got cut off. But black and 2, it's an orc pirate, and it has Raid at the beginning of your end step. If you attacked with a creature this turn, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. You lose a life equal to that card's converted mana cost. So, Raid is back. This is a returning mechanic. Yesterday when I saw this, I actually forgot for a second that this was from Khans of Tarkir. And I actually really liked it there. So I guess I just had information overload yesterday. But anyway, Raid's a great mechanic. And again, it's another mechanic that is going to promote aggressive play. I think this might be a really fast format because a lot of these cards are really promoting aggressive play. We're going to see more as we go forward too. As far as this particular card goes, well, it's hard to evaluate without knowing power toughness. My assumption though is it's probably like a 2/2 or less. And I don't know if I love that. But again, having a Bob effect that might be able to occur possibly sort of some of the time is at least interesting. I don't know if it's great. It's just really going to be dependent on the power toughness here. Vraska's Contempt. We saw this one yesterday and I really liked it. 2 black and 2 instant, exile target creature or planeswalker and you gain 2 life. Okay, the life gain most of the time will be inconsequential, but an instant, get rid of a planeswalker or a creature. Exile them, by the way, so it deals with indestructible and what have you. I do like that. So, yes, if this was a sorcery, it probably costs 3. We've seen a lot of cards like that in the past. But I don't mind spending the extra mana to do this at instant speed. I think this is going to be premium removal. Igraya's Marauders. 2 red and 3. It's a human pirate 4/4. If a creature you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. So, yeah, it's one of those double damage cards, this time on a creature. And you get yourself a 4/4 for 5 with the double damage effect. Again, maybe a good card for a hyper-aggressive deck. Burning Sun's Avatar. 3 red and 3. Dinosaur Avatar. That's kind of fun. 6/6. And when this enters the battlefield, it deals 3 damage to target opponent and 3 damage to up to 1 target creature. Now, here's the deal. It's a little tough to cast. I mean, 3 red and 3, but you're getting yourself a 6/6 and doing 3 damage to an opponent and a creature. There's a lot of value to be had here. I kind of wish it had trample. It feels like it needs trample. I mean, maybe that casting cost wasn't balanced with trample. Maybe then it would have to be like a 5/5 or cost 1 more or something. I don't know. But I feel like I want this to have trample, at least from a flavor point of view. But anyway, regardless, I do think it's a good limited card. I don't know if it does too much in the world of Standard with that 3 red. That might be difficult. There might be better things you could be doing at that point in the game. But it's an interesting kind of fun card, if nothing else. Captain Lannery Storm. And we talked about this one yesterday. A red and 2 legendary creature human pirate with haste. Whenever this attacks, create one of those treasures. And whenever you sacrifice a treasure, this will get +1/+0 until end of turn. It's a 2/2. So I said this yesterday. 2/2s for 3. Not high on those typically, but this one has haste. That mitigates it for me, so I'm okay with it. And if you have some treasures in play already, it can make combat difficult for your opponent. So I do like it. Legendary, again, is going to be a little bit of a drawback for this card, but hey, it's a legendary pirate. It looks really cool. It does some cool stuff. It could maybe help you color fix a ramp in certain circumstances. I like the card. I think overall the power level is fine. Rowdy Crew. I love the name of this one. I'm not sure if this one, it doesn't feel like a mythic to me with the picture. I was kind of guessing if maybe it was a mythic. But anyway, Goblin Pirate, trample 3/3. When this enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards at random. If 2 cards discarded this way share a type, it gets 2 +1/+1 counters. When we saw this one yesterday, we didn't make out all the words, so it's a little different than the interpretation we had yesterday. I actually don't like it as much, because I don't think we had the random yesterday. It just said discard 2 cards, I think, is what we read. But at random, that doesn't feel as good, because then you can't necessarily orchestrate making this a 5/5 trampler very easily. And also, there's going to be times you have cards like removal in your hand that you don't want to lose, and you don't want to risk playing this. And it's a big risk for a 3/3. Yes, you do get to see more cards to an extent, and it does move you through your deck, and you're going to end up with at least 1 card. Basically, you're kind of cycling this when it enters the battlefield, and that's good. But I don't know. I don't see myself playing this. If the interpretation on this is right, and granted it is still a little blurry, I'm not real high on this card. Star of Extinction. 2 red and 5. It's a sorcery. Destroy target land, and oh, by the way, deals 20 damage to each creature and each planeswalker. Okay, wow. I don't know, this might be a mythic, again, kind of hard to tell in the picture, but this is a lot of damage. I mean, it doesn't deal damage to indestructible creatures, but for the most part, this is a board sweep, and also, for some reason, destroys target land. I guess more for flavor reasons than anything else. I do love the flavor behind this card. I think it's amazing. It's kind of like the meteor hits the land, destroys it, and it's like an extinction event, destroying all the creatures and planeswalkers. But it's not 100% because, like I said, if you do happen to have something with more than 20 toughness, or more likely, if you have indestructible creatures, this could be kind of one-sided. So I don't know. This could be something you play maybe in Commander with a lot of indestructible stuff and try to exploit it that way. Other than that, it is a board sweep, but I feel like there's going to be more economical board sweeps than this one in the World of Standard. So I don't see it getting play there, but it seems like a lot of fun. Sunbird's Invocation, a red and 5 enchantment. Whenever you cast a spell from your hand, reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. You may cast a card revealed this way with converted mana cost X or less without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. Now, free spells sometimes lead to trouble, but I think this card's pretty safe. It costs 6 to play, and the turn you play it, you're probably doing absolutely nothing with it. That doesn't feel good for 6 mana. Now, next turn, you can hopefully trigger this, but again, it's not a guarantee, but hopefully you can trigger this. This is a really bad top deck, though, if you don't have anything else in your hand and you're losing. This is no Marvel. I'll put it that way. Yes, it does get you free stuff, maybe, but it's no Marvel. It just doesn't do the type of thing Marvel does, and it's just very inconsistent feeling. It's kind of a chaos red card. I don't really see it getting any play in Standard or anything like that, but it's a fun card, maybe just to mess around with in multiplayer games. Tilamali's Skin Shifter, and this is a red and 2 human shaman. It has haste, 0/1. When this attacks, it becomes a copy of another target non-legendary attacking creature until end of turn. This feels a little bit like Varath's Shapeshifter to me, which that card was a rules nightmare if you go back and want to look it up, but it has some similar qualities. It is very different, but it's intriguing to me. Now, it's reliant on what else you have. I like the fact it has haste, though. It can certainly surprise your opponent, and maybe if you're in a aggressive creature deck, this could be a really good play for you, but it's not going to do a whole lot on its own, so that makes me a little shaky on the card when it comes to Standard, but I do like it, and I would want to at least try it out and maybe try to brew with it, because it feels really interesting. Carnage Tyrant, 2 green and 4, it's a dinosaur. It can't be countered. Oh, it's trample and hexproof too, 7/6. And I think this one's a mythic from what it looks like. So, this is real hard to deal with. Basically, the only way your opponent's dealing with this is if they have ways to block it. Maybe 2/3/3s or, a 4/4 and a 2/2 or something. They're going to have to probably join block to get this thing off the battlefield. And because it doesn't have evasion, it might not be as good as it seems on paper, but it's still real good. And if you have some auras, you can back that up with the hexproof. I do like that. So I feel like it could be a really good card. Maybe a little too inconsistent for the World of Standard, but again, maybe in Commander, if there is a dinosaur deck out there, now we don't know how the pieces will really be there for a true Commander dinosaur deck, but there's ways to cheat it with changelings and different cards that make everything dinosaurs like we saw earlier. So there might be a way to do it, but other than that, I don't know, it feels like maybe a really good limited card, but it might not go beyond that. Deeproot Champion, a green and 1 Merfolk Shaman. I like green Merfolk, that's cool. 1/1, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on this. And, yeah, that's okay, but I do have an issue with this card. On its own, a 1/1 for 2 is not exciting to me. It's very, very fragile. Now, granted, it has the potential to get big and stay big. It has this kind of weird take on prowess, I guess, and that's cool. But again, green is also a very creature-heavy color, so I don't know. But you might be playing this with blue since it's a merfolk, and there's more instants and sorceries. So, I don't know. Personally, I don't think this is good. I think it's too reliant on other stuff going on, and it comes in just too small. Haven Raptor. 2 green and 2, it's a dinosaur 4/5, and it has a new mechanic called Tough. Whenever this is dealt damage, draw a card. So my assumption is basically whenever creature's dealt damage, something will happen. In this case, it's drawing a card. And again, another mechanic that rewards you for being aggressive, making your creatures go in there and rumble. And in this case, drawing a card is pretty good. And it's also 4/5 for 4. Yeah, sign me up. This feels like a really solid creature. Shaper's Sanctuary. Costs 1 green, it's an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you get to draw a card. Now, this is cheap, I will give it that. But again, your opponent, at least some of the time, is going to have some control over whether they want to let you draw the card or not. Now, granted, at some point, they're going to have to use a removal spell on your creature. The first time they do, this card basically replaces itself. He just cycled it. Congratulations. Next time it happens, you start to get card advantage, assuming this thing can hang around. Again, the only advantage I see is it's cheap. Sometimes you just don't have another good turn 1 play, and it's there. I don't know, though, if this would even make my deck, quite honestly, in a sealed pool sometimes. So, I don't know. It just feels okay, but nothing that's super exciting for me. Verdant Sun's Avatar. 2 green and 3, Dinosaur Avatar 5/5. And when this or another creature enters the battlefield, you get to gain life based on that creature's toughness. So, a 5/5 for 5 and gain 5 life, basically, when this comes into the battlefield. That's pretty sweet, I think. Again, I'm not a big fan of life gain just generally, but when you start talking to me about 5, 10 life, something like that, that becomes significant. This card will be great against aggressive decks because they're going to do their damage early, and then if you can get this out, you're going to recover nicely from what they've been doing to you, and you get yourself a 5/5, they might not be able to get around very easily. So this is a pretty decent card again. Maybe a sideboard card in some circumstances, but I do think this is really, really decent. Waker of the Wilds. 2 green and 2, Merfolk Shaman, another Merfolk. 3/3, 2 green and X, put X +1/+1 counters on target land you control. That land becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with haste, still a land. It's kind of fun, a little bit of a take on the Awaken mechanics that we've seen back in these Battle for Zendikar days. And the card itself, I think is decent. A 3/3 for 4. I think those are fine, serviceable stats. Potentially, a mana sink to get yourself some more creatures late in the game. Yeah, power level seems decent here. Alright, let's get into the gold cards with Hostage Taker. We talked about this one yesterday. It looks like it's a 2/1. It's a black, a blue, and 2 human pirate. When this enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or creature until this leaves the battlefield. You may cast that card as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell. So I kind of wonder if there's going to be a rules change to some of these like endless loop situations where things keep exiling each other and the game ends in a draw, because I feel like it might be too easy to do that with this card. It feels a little awkward to me in that regard, so I guess we'll wait and see. But I'm interested in the card. It's a little fragile. It's probably too fragile for the casting cost, again, assuming that really is 1 toughness that we see there. And that doesn't feel good, but I'm at least intrigued that I can steal something, maybe, with this card. Again, it could be good and limited. Now, this card, unfortunately, it was cut off in at least some of the photos, but regardless, we can never see the casting cost of it. But we got to see everything else, so I thought it was worth talking about because it's an interesting card. It looks to me like it's probably blue-green, but it's called Tehana Voice of Thunder, and it's a legendary creature merfolk. Power and toughness equal to the number of cards in your hand, and you have no maximum hand size, though. When this enters the battlefield, draw a card for each creature you control. Now, this card, of course, make or break the card by its casting cost in this case. I mean, if it costs 2 blue, 2 green, and 8, of course it's not a good card. But if it's reasonable in any stretch of the imagination, this could be a great card. Any creature-heavy deck would love to play something like this. Imagine playing this like in a Merfolk tribal deck where you know your key is putting out a lot of creatures. You put out your lords, you put out your Merfolk, and then you restock your hand with this. Yes, it's legendary. Again, that can be a drawback. But you know what? It doesn't matter when you draw enough cards. You just draw around the extra copies you get. So I think this has a lot of potential. Again, too early to call until we know the casting cost, but this feels really good. Admiral Beckett Brass. Alright, now here's maybe your pirate commander. A red, a black, a blue, and 1 human pirate. Other pirates you control get +1/+1. It's a 3/3. At the beginning of your end step, gain control of target non-land permanent controlled by a player who has dealt damage, combat damage, by 3 or more pirates this turn. Okay, there's a lot going on here, but again, I feel like this would be an awesome commander. It's affordable at 4, granted 3 different colors, but commander decks a lot of times can swing that, and your other pirates are getting the +1/+1 ability, and if you can get in for some combat damage here and there, you get to start stealing stuff. I mean, flavor-wise, that's awesome. So, I don't know if this is ever going to necessarily fall into any sort of standard playable situation, but This seems like a lot of fun for Commander. I really like this card. Okay, Shark Sun's Avatar. This one's expensive. It's a white, green, and red, and 5 legendary creature dinosaur avatar. Trample, Vigilance, and Haste. You're getting a lot out of it. 7/6. And when this deals combat damage to a player, reveal that many cards from the top of your library, put any number of dinosaur creature cards from among them onto the battlefield and the rest of the bottom in random order. So the Trample Haste means if you play this, attack in, even if you're just getting a point across for trample damage. And it also has Vigilance, which is nice because if you're losing, you can still attack with it, and you might not have anything to lose in certain board states. Then you could potentially populate a whole bunch of dinosaurs on your side of the board. This card's awesome. The only drawback is it's very high casting cost. Because of that, this to me feels like a great Commander card. Maybe even a Commander for a dinosaur deck. And I think this is really strong, actually. The size of the creature, granted, you have to get around that casting cost, but the size of the creature, the Trample, Vigilance, Haste, and the ability, very, very impressive, actually. All right, let's look at a couple of artifacts. This was the first card we looked at yesterday. Sorcerous Suyglass. This is a good one. 2 artifact, enters the battlefield, look at your opponent's hand, and then choose any card name. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated unless their mana abilities. So, where was this card for the last 6 months? I made that joke yesterday, but really, this could have kept like Marvel decks in check. But it's here now, and it's cheap, and it's playable. I could see this making its way into Vintage, Legacy, Modern. This feels very, very good, actually. And you get information, you get to shut off a card, and you know what? If it's a constructed format and you know what deck your opponent's on, awesome. Pick the card that is going to be the most problematic for them. If you don't know what they're playing, you play this on turn 2, look at their hand, maybe you can guess, shut off that card then. Or if it's even just a limited game, shut off the thing that's on the board that's giving you trouble. Look at their hand, shut off the best thing they're going to play that's going to give you trouble. Really fantastic card. I'm really impressed by this one. Vanquisher's Banner. Saw this one yesterday too. Cost 5 artifact. Enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, and creatures of that type get +1/+1. Whenever you cast a creature spell of the chosen type, draw a card. So recently we saw a 5 casting cost enchantment that, granted, it gives you some zombies, but it also makes all your zombies +1/+1. Win a standard Pro Tour. So is it out of the question that this could see standard play? No, I mean, it would be nice if it gave you a couple creature tokens or something, but it doesn't do that. Instead, it perhaps lets you draw some cards. That's good too. So I think power level wise, depending on where the meta goes, it could be playable. But again, another card that's going to be really good in like tribal commander decks. Alright, the last cards. We know we're going to get the Allied Buddy/Check land cycle that we saw multiple times in core sets. They do have different art, and you can go back to those pictures if you want to see the new art, or at least try to squint and see it. This is, of course, the original photos of these cards. But I like this particular cycle. I kind of wish we'd see the enemy ones. Maybe we will in the future, but at least for right now, we get a look at the Allied colors again. And Glacial Fortress hasn't been printed since Magic 2013. That's been a while. Now, the others were printed recently. As a matter of fact, the first 2 there are printed in Archenemy Nicol Bolas, which comes out today. So you can't get any more recently printed than that. And the other 2 were in last year's Commander products. So, yeah, you know, they're out there. They're not super expensive or chase cards necessarily, but they're very functional. I like these cards. They're good budget options for a lot of formats like Commander, and I've always felt like they performed and maybe overperformed for me when I've played them, so I'm actually kind of happy with this cycle. I think it's good, especially for new players that might not have copies of these. Alright, having said that, we got there. Alright, so like I said, I hope this is the last we're talking about Ixalan for a very, very long time. I'll have a video a little bit later today where we're going to talk about, or maybe I don't know what order I'm going to put them out yet, so maybe you've already seen it. But I'm also going to put out Hour of Devastation previews, which we have a few already at the time I'm making this video. And once I feel like we're maybe close to having all of them for the day, I'll be putting out a video for that too. So until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.